Welcome to the Reel Rematch, the podcast where we unpack Hollywood's twin films, sometimes cloned on purpose, sometimes by accident, but always in competition. Today's matchup, Fishy Business, Finding Nemo versus Shark Tale, two undersea adventures swimming in the same waters released just 1 year apart. Which one hooked audiences? Which one made a bigger splash at the box office? And which animated ocean tale still reigns supreme beneath the waves? Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Justin. How you going, mate?
Good. Looking forward to diving into this episode.
All right, we're starting the puns early.
Well, talking about puns, I don't know if you noticed this, but like Shark Tale is so loaded with puns, especially at the start of the movie. But in all respect, like they're so obvious, they're not really clever. It's not like Finding Nemo. Like Finding Nemo's got a few, but they sprinkle them throughout. And like one of my favorite ones, like kind of play of words, is they go see P. Sherman, so fisherman or whatever, right? Yeah. So they got really smart stuff where all the other stuff is like really obvious in Shark Tale. So
yes,
I started with a pun in honor of the ridiculous amount of puns in Shark Tale.
All right. So we're going to talk about Shark Tale and versus Finding Nemo here today. Where would you like to start then, other than puns?
Well, I think we have to start with Finding Nemo, which, I've actually seen this film a few times, not just when it came out and otherwise. My youngest daughter was actually in a theatrical production for Finding Nemo, and it's just an amazing film. Like, take out the animation outside of it, it's just such an excellent, well-executed film. Like, it's amazing. And it was an absolute joy to rewatch. And I think I only rewatched it was it a year, 2 years ago, or whatever, something like that. But watching it again, it was an absolute pleasure, right? It didn't feel like, it didn't feel like work, didn't feel like heavy lifting. And of course, the other thing that's probably close to our heart is like, hey, what's not to love about a film that starts off in the Great Barrier Reef and then comes down to Sydney, right?
That's right.
And hear it in an Australian accent, especially in the dentist, room or clinic or whatever you like to refer that to as.
Yes.
Was just amazing. So, you see a little bit of the Sydney skyline and otherwise. And, obviously for sort of like two proud Aussies, it was great to really have that, front and centre. So why don't we start there?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, agree with you totally. Amazing film, like yourself, seen it originally, always been a Pixar fan since the original Toy Story. And this is going through when they were just at the peak of their storytelling, right? The emotional depth they always hit with their films, I think, because they're always about story. It's always been their ethos since the very beginning. Yeah, it's just a great, amazing film. The animation in it is fantastic. It's, there are sections of it that are so lifelike and realistic in terms of the underwater animation that you wonder to yourself, is it actually just them almost sticking animation on top of actual footage underwater? But it's not. It's completely animated. But I agree, the story is amazing. It's a fantastic story. It's obviously an iconic film that's been loved since it came out. But yeah, I think it's absolutely awesome. So, yeah.
You mentioned something super cool about the film, the photorealism, right? Like there are aspects where it's like, am I literally looking at, through a macro lens at something really close in real life? So, I mean, there's so many examples, but two that, sort of like, struck me is towards the start, you see the actual scales on marlin, right? And the other one where you see the scuba mask, lights out. That is just absolutely incredible. Like the level of detail. I also read somewhere that they did all these different, like the animators did all these different tests around water, right? And one of their tests, the water apparently looks so real, they had to, add some effects to make it look faker, right?
Yeah, I read the same thing. Yeah.
Just insane.
Oh, they actually had to tone it down to a degree because it was so photorealistic on their animation.
And it's funny how it does go through scenes where it's so photoreal or hyper realistic and otherwise, and others where it feels a bit more like an animation, but just so exceptionally well done. And I think I love animations, right? Like I'm not like animation head or whatever, but I don't know all the tools and techniques that they use and otherwise, but I really do believe they struck the right balance. And I mean, it just holds up, and it's just there's so much to like about it. You can just tell that it literally feels like, even though there would have been, 1,000, 2,000, who knows how many people actually work in the whole thing, it still feels handcrafted, right?
Yeah.
With love and care, and everyone obviously had so much passion just going into it. So let's talk a little bit about, obviously, Jeff, tee us off. Facts and figures of Finding Nemo.
All right. So Nemo was released May 30th, 2003. Did very, very, very well at the time. It opened wide, taking 70.2 in its opening weekend, but it ended up with a massive run of 339 million domestically. Overseas, it did even better, taking another 555.5 million, and it saw a worldwide haul of 870.1. Just out of that, interestingly, the largest overseas market was actually in Japan, where it took 102 million just in Japan, which
That's incredible.
That's like 20% of its total worldwide gross just came from that country, which
Wow.
is really, really interesting. It was the second highest grossing film of 2003, only behind Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, obviously, which was coming to the end of the trilogy, so therefore smashed it out of the park. And actually, interestingly, at the time, it was the highest grossing animated film of all time, overtaking The Lion King at that point, which had held the mantle since the early 90s. But then Disney did a re-release in 2012. And again, this just shows the power of this film and how strong it is from a story perspective, even everyone remembering it. They did a 3D re-release 2012, took another 70 million just from a re-release of a film that was at that point 8 years old, right? So overall, this has just shy of $1 billion, taking 940 million. Fantastic results. So, and from a budget of 90 at the time.
So sort of like 10x over the journey just at the box office.
10x over the journey, absolutely.
Excluding like sell-throughs, home rental and the like, right?
Well, actually as well at the time, and obviously we know hardware DVDs is not a thing in this modern day and age. At the time, it still holds the record for the most DVD sales ever.
40 million copies.
40 million copies. So no other film has done that.
And I heard that it actually set the first day USA record for home release sales with 8 million copies
in one day.
Sold on the first day. 80% of that were on DVD.
There you go.
I mean, that's amazing. Obviously, it doesn't happen like that anymore and otherwise.
No.
Be great to be able to get some stats. Maybe we should mark this for ourselves for homework for some of the more contemporary films we do in terms of, the video on demand where you can pay the premium, like the $30, watch it at home.
Yeah, okay.
Whatever it happens to be.
Yep.
Be good to see if we can get some stats on that because you and I said, again, like going back to the 90s and otherwise when, like where we met, we started talking about films and making little films ourselves and what have you, is that, it was like sport for us, right?
Yeah.
So it was like, football cards or baseball cards or, whatever, right? Where we're trading stats. It goes, oh yeah, and that made like, 23.9 on like, home video rentals. And those stats were readily available and they kind of meant something, right? It was like some currency, but you don't really get that anymore, right?
No. And also because, things have changed. Like even back here in the early 2000s, films had more legs and performed well, right? So they have greater time at the box office, whereas nowadays box office is if you don't perform within the first week, maybe 2 or 3, you're out, or they dramatically cut the number of screens you have. So this one obviously went on to do massive business. So,
and then, audiences and critics alike, Jeff, how do they respond to it?
Well, this one still, actually, amazingly, this has a 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, which there's not many that are at that point, admittedly. It's got an 8.2 out of 10 on IMDb and a 90 on Metacritic. And the audiences love it. It's at 86% on the Popcornometer with more than 250,000 reviews. So,
wow.
Same, like us, everyone loves this film because it is truly just one of those films that hit the right mark at the right time.
So let's talk about the directors. So Andrew Stanton, right? So, long-time Pixar writer. He worked on, one of your favourites, Toy Story. Not to say that I don't like, but I think you love it more than me. Monsters, Inc. He directed Bug's Life in 1998. And then he followed this with, like this film, Finding Nemo, with Wall-E in 2008. It also had a co-director, a gentleman by the name of Lee Unkrich.
Yep.
Hopefully I pronounced his name correctly. He directed Toy Story 2 in 99.
Yes.
Monsters, Inc. in 2001. This in 2003. And then Toy Story 3 in 2010. That's some resume.
Well, and both of these two on what they basically call their senior creative team at Pixar. Still, both Andrew Stanton and Lee Unkrich.
So is that like a creative board of directors?
Yeah, so I think it's like the part of the Pixar Brains Trust, let's say. So these two guys who have been there since the very beginning are now integral parts of the Pixar machine. So they've been involved in like everything you said there, but also films like, in terms of Finding Dory, which is the sequel that came out 13 years later, Monsters, Inc., like you said, Coco, which was a massive hit. All of those films, everything Pixar's done since 95 through to now, these two have had their fingers in that pie, so to speak. So they're very well known, and they won an Academy Award for this as best animated film. So they're also Academy Award winners.
I mean, absolutely deserved it, right?
Yeah.
So, let's get into the comparison on Shark Tale.
All right, Shark Tale. Where do we go? Is this as beloved as Finding Nemo? I'm going to say no. I think you may agree with me, but I'll leave you to say that when you do. This came out just over a year later in 2004. Didn't do too bad at the box office. So it took 47.6 in its opening weekend, finishing out with about 161.5 million. Overseas, it took another 210 and ended up its run with about $372 million. So it was the 8th highest grossing film of 2004, so not up there in terms of where Nemo was. But in terms of animation, it was eclipsed a year later by Shrek 2, which took $933 million. So I think we can see that it's not as strong in terms of what it was, and we'll obviously get into more reasons for that shortly. Now, this had a budget of $75 million, so slightly less than Nemo.
So roughly like
5 times
5x versus Nemo at the box office 10x.
Yeah.
Right.
Plus, that's not including DVD sales. So we've got the highest grossing DVD film of all time versus I don't even know what the numbers are.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think
if they're not calling any attention to it, probably doesn't matter.
Exactly right.
So critical and audience reception, Jeff.
Yeah, so this one is a bit different. I think I wrote here it's a bit more meh with Shark Tale. Compared to Nemo's 99, Shark Tale sits at 35% on Rotten Tomatoes, so literally a third of the score. 6 out of 10 on IMDb and only 48 on Metacritic. At the same time, it only has a 46% rating on the Popcornometer, again from over 250,000 reviews. So you can't say it's half as good, but the scores are, if you went it from a literal score perspective, that's where you're sitting, right? So
let me talk about the directors and then we'll get into some of the, comparative analysis as to why these two films so close together that, face value at least have some fair amount of similarities.
Yes.
So directors on Shark Tale, again, pretty solid. Not as obviously strong as Finding Nemo, but you got Vicky Jensen. Now, she did Shrek.
Yes.
In 2001. She does this in 2004, and then randomly, she doesn't do another animated film for 20 years, right? She does Spellbound in 24. She obviously did some live action movies and TV in between and otherwise. Then you've got a gentleman called Bebo Bergeron. He did the Road to El Dorado in 2000.
Yep.
Rob Letterman, that was his debut. Then he followed that with Monsters vs. Aliens in 2009. Now, what actually struck me, and again, I love animation, but as we're starting to analyze these things and talk about them, I've always noticed, and I haven't really dug in, so I did a little bit of digging, right, superficially, but as to why do so many animated films have 2 directors or 3 directors and otherwise? So what I was looking to is because these films they take anywhere to 4 to 7 years to produce. Yes. There's so much going on, and everyone's got different strengths because there's so much going on in animation. You'd argue that it is at times more complex than actually just doing a live action.
Yeah.
So again, you might have, people who, are more focused on story. Some people who are really, really good at the technical elements, right? So it's not just one reason. They kind of get, different skill sets, right? Then hopefully those skill sets, gel and, and the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? And that's what they're hoping to bring in. Sometimes, again, you might have someone playing major, someone playing minor roles as the production goes through and maybe their ability to sort of focus and finish is reduced by getting pulled in different directions on other things they're working on, right? So right. I just thought it was really interesting because I've always wondered, why is there always 2 directors for the most part?
Yeah, it is always multiples, isn't it? Yeah.
So now a big question and really the sort of raison d'etre for our whole pod, Jeff, is, face value, right? You've got these 2 animated films that are set in the water, right? They're anthropomorphic, fish and other, creatures in the ocean and so on and so forth. They come out, roughly within a year of each other, right? On, one side you've got Pixar. I don't think were they owned by Disney at this stage, Jeff?
No, not owned by Disney at this point. No, they were still worked with Disney and Disney helped distribute their films, but they weren't owned by Disney at this point.
So you've got Pixar on one hand and then you've got DreamWorks on the other, right? Now, looking into this, there was, sort of, I think we need to kind of take a step back by about a decade, right? Because you've got Jeffrey Katzenberg, right, who was an executive at Disney 84 to 94, right? He was brought into the Walt Disney Company by CEO Michael Eisner and he became chairman of Walt Disney Studios. He saw film division, operations, live action, TV, and animation. And he played a major role in really revitalizing Disney's animation department and, sort of led the charge of what I think can be referred to as the Disney Renaissance, right? Where they had a dream run, right? Absolute bangers, including but not limited to, you've got Little Mermaid in 89, Beauty and the Beast in 91, Aladdin in 92, and Lion King in 94, right? I mean, I love all those films, right? And his fingerprints are obviously all over that. Crazy thing is, in 94, the wheels apparently were falling off. I think there were political machinations and otherwise tension between him and Eisner, right? So there was a gentleman by the name of Frank Wells who was the president of Disney. He died tragically in a helicopter crash, and Katzenberg thought he was going to be promoted to Wells's role as president, right? Because Eisner had allegedly implied or suggested, made overtures or otherwise, that was going to be the case. However, after Wells's death, Eisner, who was the CEO of Disney, he refused to promote Katzenberg to president. Apparently, then he forced Katzenberg to resign in August of 94. Katzenberg just felt, well, that's a stab in the back and a dagger to the heart at the same time.
Yes.
I've, played a pretty outsized role in probably the turnaround of Disney animation, even if we just want to focus on that. And then Eisner started whiteheading him, right? Just to say, no, he's really difficult to work with. He's not a team player. And Katzenberg turns around and goes, yeah, okay, I'm going to sue you, right? For contract bonuses that he believed he's owed. And he won $250 million. He was settled for, right? So after that, I think it was in October of 94. So August to, I've had some flourishes in my life, Jeff, but I don't think I've gone from getting fired in August and then starting up a brand new film studio in October of the same year, right? A little outfit called DreamWorks SKG, which competed directly with Disney, and obviously had a gentleman that you may have heard of, Mr. Steven Spielberg.
He's come across my desk once or twice.
And a Mr. David Geffen, right? I mean, so he founded that literally within a few months of just leaving Disney, and I think that the animation unit of DreamWorks actually kicked off in 04. With it spun off into its own unit. I don't know if Shark Tale was the first one released under that banner. I don't have that. Their first hit was Prince of Egypt in 98. And their first outsized hit was obviously Shrek in 2001. So Katzenberg certainly had a sort of large role in playing that. However, I don't think there was any plagiarism.
No, and looking into it, so from what I understand, and if you look at when these came into fruition, Pixar started production planning on Nemo in 97. This was actually Andrew Stanton's idea, and apparently it had been floating around in his head since he was a kid when he used to go into his dentist's office, and he had fish tank in his actual dentist's office. And he's literally, as a whatever, I mean, I don't know, as a kid, whether it was under 10 or as an early teenager or whatever, thought, do those fish want to be there or do they want to be back in the ocean, right? And that's where the spark of idea came. So whereas DreamWorks announced production of Shark Tale in 2002, because they'd already kicked off the idea, I understand that it was already bandied around as they were in post on Shrek, sort of late 2000, early 2001, when they were finalising Shrek. That's what they got talking about as their next production to do. I
mean, I did see something, and there's no way to validate this or otherwise. It's not like we can pick up the phone and get some exec in Hollywood who's got the inside knowledge. Right? But one thing that I read, and again, I don't know the veracity of this piece of information, is apparently once Nemo was formally released, they accelerated Shark Tale, which initially was called Shark Slayer.
Yes.
Right? So they accelerated that. But it's interesting, even though Disney was distributing the film and otherwise, this wasn't the first time, again, the Katzenberg thought he'd sort of get pugilistic and otherwise and go head to head with his old company, right? I mean, and I think we're doing this, spoiler alert for anyone, in X amount of episodes time, Ants in 1998.
Yes.
Came out just before Pixar's A Bug's Life, same year, right? And again, I think it was a similar scenario that even though not dissimilar to Finding Nemo, Bug's Life, again, Pixar, was actually being developed a lot earlier and otherwise. But then once Katzenberg got wind of that, again, he accelerated development of Ants. So this is the first time he tried to beat Pixar at really sort of their own game. I guess.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. But again, there was a quote somewhere that he was openly asked about, why are you making a film that rips off Nemo? And he said, well, we're not. We're actually, when I heard they were doing it, I actually spoke to the team at Pixar, because obviously I'm sure there are technicians who work across, who have left one place to work at another one, etc. But he said we both knew we were working on this film, and we just realised that our films were different enough, even though based underwater with fish as the main characters, that we just get on and do what we need to do.
It's so true. And let's talk about that. I mean, again, the difference of the two stories, right, is that Finding Nemo is a really emotional, character-driven story, about parenting anxiety and independence, right?
Yep.
And it's really clear and contained as to what it is. And, the rite of passage that Nemo and also his father goes through as well. That's what resonates today, especially, you're a parent, I'm a parent. It just hits. Yeah. Right? And even when we're watching it, pre-kids, well, we used to be a kid. Yeah. We had parents, right? And maybe that's, you start to, contemplate and, ruminate on, why your parents did different actions or why they did certain things, how you reacted in certain ways. So that, I think for us personally, that's why it just, resonates so strongly with us, 20 plus years after its release, right?
Yes.
So Shark Tale, however, it's just a parody of mafia films, right? I mean, the similarity there is there is that father-son aspect, right? With, was it Don Leo or whatever the Rob De Niro voice character is, and then Lenny, the Jack Black sort of character is, but it's pretty weak. It's pretty thin. It's there.
Oh, yeah, but it's
tokenistic, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, completely. And but also, there's all other dramatic differences. Nemo is set in a world where they're fish on a reef and they're in the ocean, whereas Shark Tale is this anthropomorphized, I've stuffed that word up, but you know what I'm saying, where there's underwater cities and they live in apartment buildings and they work in car washes and, they drive fish cars and whatever it is, go to the fish diner and, that's where a lot of puns you were talking about come into play, you know what I mean? And, that's a big difference of trying to humanise that side of things on Shark Tale, whereas Nemo is about the story, like you said, about independence and anxiety and, overprotection and the coming of age and the journey that they both go on. That's not as strong in any way, shape, or form in Shark Tale, right?
It's so true. It almost feels that the emphasis on being self-referential and pop culture becomes a distraction and kind of gets in the way of what could have been an interesting story, maybe, if I'm being charitable, to Shark Tale. Yeah. And it's it feels like a Temu version of Shrek.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
So do you know, because Shrek's so smart and so clever when it does that. But the thing is, Finding Nemo has aspects of that, but again, it's super clever. It's very subtle and it's in the background and it's just part of the story versus it becomes a focus of the story or otherwise. And there's so many examples to point at, where would you start, where would you stop? But yeah, so, really interesting. I think there was probably obviously ego driving, some films that, maybe face value had some kind of similarities, but realistically, I think it was just another one of those things where there was something in the zeitgeist. Maybe, I don't know, there was, I think maybe it's sort of a greater interest, obviously, in animation that's kind of started in the 90s, and then we started to, bring animation into, the next century and
digital age.
There's always kids have always been, fascinated, I think, with, elements of marine biology, even if it's just going to aquariums and other things. So I think, it was just ripe for the picking, and the fact that these two films came about at the same time, again, in the zeitgeist, a little bit of ego and otherwise in the background, but nothing else I can really point to.
No, and I think it's almost because in looking at, the common, it's not even a complaint, but the common thing and the feedback and the reviews that people put out there in terms of not critical reviews, but let's say audience reviews and film going reviews, is one of the big gripes, let's say, aside from the story, is people thinking this is a rip-off of Finding Nemo, right? Yeah. Which is probably unfair in Shark Tale's defense, as we just said, because they're not, the only similarities are in the water. We've already said the story is massively different. The style is dramatically different. So it's just a bit unfair to say that, realistically, because they're not similar in any sense. So,
at all.
Like you said, the tenuous father-son thing is the closest you could get to some kind of similarity.
Yeah, and you know, so for me, like in and of itself, like Shark Tale, again, I'm not just trying to like shit on the film or anything like that as well, but you know, comparing and contrasting to Finding Nemo, it's almost unfair. It's not in the same category.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And in all fairness, yeah, fine, you've got a supernova talent in terms of, you know, like big name actors as the voice cast. It may not be the best voice actors, and a lot of them don't really do voice acting a lot, like De Niro as an example. Jolie hasn't done a whole heap, you know, Zellweger hasn't done a whole heap. Like they've done little bits here and there, not much.
Yeah.
Whereas like Finding Nemo, like, you know, you've got some like, you know, dyed-in-the-wool sort of, you know, absolutely heavy hitters when it comes to, you know, voice acting and otherwise. And, you know, again, just, you know, I think they're just very, you know, different.
Yeah.
But let's talk about some of the kind of like the key casts and otherwise. Let's kick off with Finding Nemo, right? So some of the voice talent behind this. So, you know, Brad Garrett and Alison Janney, right?
Yes.
Alexander Gould, who, you know, was a bit of a bit part actor, had been working in Hollywood for about 8 years and then made a huge splash, again, part of the pun with this film. He kept working and was notably in 8 seasons of the TV show Weeds, which ran, you know, 2005 to 2012.
Yep.
He had some small voice work in Finding Dory in 2016, but not as Nemo, and he's done nothing since.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So, again, let me jump back into, because I mentioned Brad Garrett and Alison Janney off the top, so I get back into Brad Garrett. This is his second Pixar film, the first one being A Bug's Life in 98, and his third one would be Ratatouille. I mean, as a voice actor for those 3 films, I love each and every one of those films. Like, I've got to say, if I had to force rank them, I'd absolutely say Finding Nemo, Ratatouille, and then Bug's Life.
I would agree with you on that.
So Alison Janney, this was her first animated film, right? So she then reprised her role as Peach the Pink Starfish in Finding Dory in 2016. She voiced Gladys Sharp in Over the Hedge in 2006, Miss Grunion in Mr. Peabody and Sherman in 2014, Madge Nelson in Minions in 2015, and Marco Needler in the animated The Addams Family in 2019. So again, like just really like, you know, strong, you know, like voice talent and otherwise who really sort of like took this seriously versus some of the other actors who are absolutely amazing actors, you know, maybe did something as a nice distraction, you know, nice little paycheck, something a little bit different, but, you know, hadn't dedicated a lot of their time or their career to doing these type of films.
Yeah.
We can walk into, you know, some of the other, you know, characters. Obviously, like we mentioned off the top, there's a really strong Aussie connection. You know, you've also got the vocal talents of Jeffrey Rush, Eric Bana, Barry Humphries, and Bruce Spence.
Yes.
Right? Which is amazing.
Yes.
So that's really some of the voice talent, which is pretty impressive for Finding Nemo.
There's actually a version somewhere out there where Rove is one of the crabs.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So for those, I guess, who don't know, Rove McManus started off in the 2000s running his own TV talk show, and he's actually a Perth boy, where Jeff and I hail from.
Grew up.
And, you know, he had a hugely successful run sort of like on that TV show. And then he was, I think, the key producer behind The Project.
Yeah.
Which was, you know, very different sort of current affairs show. They ran on Channel 10 for 10, 15 years or something like that. Just finished. I think he did some other things as well, not to undersell, you know, the sort of what he's done, but he was huge, certainly from an Australian perspective.
Yeah.
And it's great that they, you know, leaned into the Australianness of the setting and the
I agree. And I think it does work because of that. You know, you've got particularly, I think Jeffrey Rush and all the pelicans and the seagulls in Sydney Harbour fits very well because it needs to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I know you've got a bunch of American fish in a set sitting in an aquarium.
Yeah.
You know, which potentially works well with the far from home side of things.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's true.
Yeah. So, but I think, the Aussie connection in here are really strong. They're really good, you know.
So let's jump over to Shark Tale and talk about some of the voice talent there. I mean, look, again, you've got some of the biggest, you know, like stars of like, you know, the 90s and 2000s or, you know, De Niro's the last 50 years, right? But Will Smith, obviously, you know, everyone knows Will Smith.
Yeah.
Robert De Niro, everyone knows him. Renee Zellweger, like huge stars, right? The interesting thing is that outside of Shark Tale, Will Smith's only major theatrical animated voice role is Lance Sterling in Spies in Disguise in 2019. And again, it was pretty much almost like a once-off from a voice work perspective for De Niro. It was the first major voice work for Renee Zellweger. She did have another major voice role in B-Movie in 2007.
Yeah, okay.
And you know, again, Jack Black, he is a notable sort of a voice talent, like huge, right? So he obviously voices Lenny. He had a small role in Ice Age in 2002. Then he led the Kung Fu Panda series as Po in 2008, 2011, 2016, and 2024. And he also voiced Bowser in Super Mario Brothers movie in 2023.
Yes.
Again, you've got Angelina Jolie. I mean, the voice cast is stacked from like a live action actor perspective. It was her first voice acting in a feature length film. Later, she'd go on to voice Grendel's mother in Beowulf in 2011.
Yes, remember.
Tigress in the Kung Fu Panda films.
Yep.
And Stella the Elephant in The One and Only Ivan in 2020.
Yeah, okay.
And then really interesting, you've got some other kind of like fascinating kind of like characters. I think the most interesting one is like Martin Scorsese. Like,
yeah, it seems so unlike anything Scorsese would do.
And I think it's magnificent that they got him and his role as a blowfish and the blowfish kind of looks a little bit like him if you kind of squint your eyes a little bit.
Well, that was actually part of there, and that was a style choice because obviously the very clearest one is you can see the fish is Will Smith. It's shaped on his voice, but that was one of their animation choices was to try and model the fish to match the face.
Classic. So you've also got Ziggy Marley, so obviously one of the jellyfish. You've got Michael Imperioli alongside Vincent Pastore.
Yep.
They were, obviously both in The Sopranos. Michael Imperioli had a small role as Spider in Goodfellas as well. And then, of course, you got Peter Falk, right? So I thought it was really interesting. But the other thing I did want to mention is that there's two really experienced voice actors. Don't ask me, who they voiced or what they played, but you had Carlos Lazaraqui.
Right.
I hope I pronounced it. I've clearly butchered that. And Frank Welker. They were the only cast members, I believe, to actually appear in both Finding Nemo and Shark Tale. So small amount of connective tissue.
Frank Welker, and I didn't look this up, but I know this because it's stuck in my head having watched it, is the voice of, he's done the monkey. Oh, gosh, it's from, anyway, let's not sit. I could sit here for 10 minutes.
It could come back to you.
You know the one I'm talking about. Anyway, keep going.
It'll come back to you, hopefully.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the other interesting thing is that there's not really, obviously we love to do this, is there an Australian connection? So apparently Katie Curran in the global version and the US version was Katie Couric. However,
I know what you're going to say.
For Australian audiences, it was actually voiced by Channel 9 news anchor Tracy Grimshaw.
Yes, which is fantastic. That made me laugh. Do you know what I mean?
That certainly gave me a smile. So I loved how they kind of like localized it somewhere. But what a choice.
Yeah.
Like it almost feels that again is a bit of a steal or otherwise of Finding Nemo. Obviously been set in Australia and so on and so forth. Like just randomly, like for nowhere else in the world, but for the island continent of Australia, we're going to sub out Katie Couric's voice and sub in an Australian newsreader's voice.
Yeah.
What a choice.
Which is quite interesting, as you said, because, like, I get it. Australian audiences don't know who Katie Couric is. But in terms of an animated kids film, do you think anyone who saw this is going to know who Tracy Grimshaw is? And I'm assuming her name is Katie Curran.
Yes.
They don't change that part. So it seems quite a bizarre option to do. I don't know why they do that.
Again, like, I just think that maybe there's something, again, that you go.
Is it an Australian content question?
But why when they've done something for a much larger market in the UK?
Yeah.
Right? And have it like it's a BBC newsreader.
Yeah. Like someone from one of their massive morning shows that they have in the UK. Right. Because they're huge over there.
Or if that was a choice they're going to make, hey, like, why do we do it for all large markets? Like, let's do one for France. Let's do for Germany.
Exactly.
Let's do one for Japan or, whatever the case may happen to be.
Yeah.
It just seems like so random.
Yes.
The only thing I can tie to is maybe the Australianism of Finding Nemo when they're trying to sprinkle fairy dust there. I don't know.
Possibly. Actually, yeah, that's a very good point. Yes, maybe that was the reason why.
But,
an obscure role to do it on. But anyway,
it is bizarre.
Yeah.
So, look, Jeff, did you have any, productions, stories, scenes from the front line, anything that you could find on that?
Well, this is, okay, so Pixar, although they've always been known for story, that's always been, if you don't have a story, we don't start. This is one of the only Pixar films ever to go into production with a fully completed script ready to go, and that was not changed. Whereas historically, and I think still to this day, most Pixar films go into production with an incomplete script and they develop it as they go when they're looking at the animation and how to amend things and keep things going. So that was really interesting. The only other thing of note was they actually changed Marlon's voice. So the original cast in this was that William H. Macy was cast as Marlon. That was the only, and not just in a sense of he did a few days' work or everything. He recorded all his lines, had everything done, but then when they were running it through and actually running animatics and doing everything in actual animation, it just wasn't working for them. So they changed him out for Albert Brooks.
Yeah, right. Interesting.
Yeah, on Shark Tale, the main thing is, it was called derivative from the very beginning because, like you said, all of those references that we spoke about in pop culture, but also because some of them are a bit older, you know what I mean? Like the things like car wash and car washers and using the song car wash, which was historically a 60s idea, right? That was something. So this was the very first DreamWorks film to go completely digital and all computer animation. They'd never used 100% computer animation prior to this. So their animation team had to go through a massive learning curve to do all that stuff because they'd always used a mix of hand-drawn and then moving through computer animation. That's not really a production drama, but I mean, that's all it was. And as I mentioned before, the only other thing I thought was that they went out there and on purpose, their style was to match the fish to the face, right? So that's why, the fish that is Will Smith is what it is. Why Scores is what it is. Sharks are meant to look like Jack Black, Robert De Niro, Michael Imperioli, those kind of things. So, did you anything else you found in your looking around?
Yeah, I've got a little bit, right. So first of all, I want to start with the music score or the composer, right? So John Lasseter, sort of top dog at Pixar. Apparently, he initially considered Danny Elfman to score the film. He turned it down. Then he went to Hans Zimmer. He turned it down as well, which is interesting in a point that I'll get to a bit later. And then they decided to go to Randy Newman's cousin, Thomas, right? Which is interesting because this was the first Pixar Animation Studios film not to have a score by Randy Newman, right?
Yeah.
So Thomas Newman, his score was performed by a 105-piece orchestra. It was his first score for an animated film. He'd later go on to do Wall-E, so obviously Stanton was pretty happy with the work that he did. Finding Dory in 2016 and Elemental in 2023, right?
Okay.
But it was also the first Pixar Animation Studios film not to have any original songs, right? So I thought that was interesting. Now, I'm going to jump over to Shark Tale, right? So Shark Tale was scored by Hans Zimmer, right? It was the first DreamWorks animation movie to have Hans Zimmer compose the score solely. He had previously teamed up with John Powell, The Prince of Egypt, The Road to El Dorado, and Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron. But the first one that he did by himself, and apparently he told producer Jeffrey Katzenberg that he couldn't deal with any more epic movies. He wanted to do a fun animated movie instead, so he got the gig, right? So, I mean, look, I think it worked really well. In all fairness, the music for both is great. I thought that was interesting. The other two things I just wanted to shine a bit of a light on, G, was this is we talked about the photorealism, right? So the look and the feel of the underwater world were essential, obviously. It was always going to be to the film's success, right? So the production crew, they took multiple visits to aquariums. They had diving stints apparently in Monterey and Hawaii. I
believe they even went to the Great Barrier Reef as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And they had study sessions in front of a 25-gallon fish tank at Pixar, a couple of in-house lectures from there's no way I can pronounce this, ichthyologist, which is apparently a branch of zoology that deals with fish. No doubt I butchered the pronunciation of that. And to see how realistic they could make the water and the waves appear, the art team was asked to make exact copies of actual underwater and above water shots. The crazy thing is that apparently the results were deemed too realistic for a cartoon. So they had to make it look fake, so people didn't think it was actual footage of the ocean surface.
Yes,
right. I found that fascinating. Right. So the other things around the production, I'll give you one final one for Finding Nemo, and then I'll leave one with Shark Tale. We'll move on. Comes down to they always talk about the technical aspects of animation. There's just so much that goes into it, and I love reading about sort of like some of this stuff. Where it's like, it took 10 years to render a single frame or things like this.
Yeah.
So I've got one of those sort of stories. So apparently, at a resolution of 1600 by 900, rendering a frame which lasted about 1/24th of a second in a film could take up to 4 days. Right. And apparently, due to the complexity of the underwater environment, the sunlight coming through the water, hearing the fish scales and so on and so forth. And it was interesting because then in Shark Tale, and again, I love these sort of like stories, is that in the racetrack sequence, right, there were more than 16,000 computer animated 3D characters in the stands. Right. So anyway, I thought those
16,000 they put in the stands.
Yeah.
Wow. That's huge.
All the effort. And it's funny because we probably didn't appreciate it.
Yeah.
Or, I'll put my hand up right now and say, I probably didn't.
Yeah, no, I'll agree. Yeah, I mean, look, it was, for me, that's one of the weirdest scenes anyway. I find the racetrack scene not weird in the sense of I get what its point is to the story, but even just the way, for me, it's like, it's that what if moment. It's like, all right, I get it. To work out how he's going to lose when his horse is winning, and what do? The seahorse does a spill, and then literally in some epic Bugs Bunny style animation, just slows down and stops 2 centimeters from the line, from the finish line. Yeah. Just seemed a bit too over the top for me from that scene. So
yeah, it was, it was an odd choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but yeah, other than that, no, there wasn't. I think they just both productions went through without anything huge or crazy going on behind the scene.
So why don't we get into like some fun facts about each film? Like, kick us off, Jack.
So. All right, what have we got here? Obviously, you said there was many massive references. One of my favourite lines I love the line in Shark Tale, probably one of my favourite little sections. It's all of a brief moment. Is at the very beginning when Lenny and his brother, Frankie, are swimming, and Frankie's going, da-da, da-da, da-da. He's like, I don't like that song. It gives me the creeps. He's like, dude, it's our theme tune. Like, it's gold. It's gold. It's one of those one-line throwaways that's really good. But so, interestingly, in terms of different casting, James Gandolfini, who was Tony Soprano, was originally meant to be Don Lena.
Really?
And he turned it down. He actually didn't want to do it.
Oh, that's a shame. He would have crushed it.
Because, that would have been a completely different, like, Tony Soprano is one of the all-time greatest characters on TV, 100%. Right? Sopranos took HBO to where HBO went to. Everyone says that, right? Because of the power behind that show. So that would have been really, really interesting to have him at the time. And he was peak Tony Soprano at that point. We're talking Series 2, Series 3 in the early 2000s. So Ving Rhames, Delroy Lindo, Anthony Mackie, 50 Cent, Exhibit, and Snoop Dogg also all tested for the role of Oscar, apparently.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that was interesting.
Snoop Dogg would have been amazing. It would have been amazing. So, completely different film.
Absolutely.
Completely different film.
It would have gone on for about 3 hours, just purely like, oh, hey. So, yeah, that was interesting in terms of casting. So what else have I... All right, let's just stick with Shark Tale at the moment. So as you said, it was originally called Shark Slayer, was the original title. A year and a half before release, Katzenberg told them to change it because he didn't think it wasn't family-friendly enough and would put the families off. So I'm sure you probably found that note as well. So this film had a bit of controversy behind it, right? Because it was seen as overly stereotypical, it was criticised for perpetuating stereotypes of Italian Americans as gangsters, and the Coalition Against Racial, Religious and Ethnic Stereotyping called for a boycott of the film, as well as its sponsors, which was Coca-Cola, Burger King, Krispy Kreme, General Mills, Hasbro Toys and Activision, because they were the main marketing partners of the film.
Wow.
So imagine what that would have done if that actually got anywhere. And again, most of it is, leaning towards, the criticisms are, it was too adult in its themes, particularly for Shark Tale. As you can appreciate, mafias, we just talked about racing scenes, things going on, gangsters, that kind of stuff. And the only other thing I really had from here in terms of fun facts is that the way they recorded the voices for Shark Tale. So normally in a standard animation, the actor comes into the studio, it's him on one side of the glass and then producers and everyone else on the other side, recording his lines alone, and that's what it does, probably hearing other people in his earphones. On this, they actually chose to do them in groups and together. So, for example, in LA, because they lived out that way, you had Will Smith did some of his stuff with Renee Zellweger in the studio, with Angelina Jolie in the studio, with Jack Black doing sessions together. And then Scorsese and De Niro would do sessions together in New York.
Right.
So, which again is just a slightly unusual voice recording. So, which I think once you understand that point and you think about, because again, for me, this film is Will Smith being a fish. You know what I mean? He's not a character called Oscar. It's Will Smith being Will Smith as a fish.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
100%.
And maybe part of that is him riffing in fact that against the person in the room with him. I don't know. So, and then my only other fun note was the same one you had of Tracy Grimshaw being the voice of
It's gold. Yeah. So, I've actually got another piece of connective tissue between the two films.
All right. Interesting.
Right?
Yes.
So, Shark Tale.
Yes.
So when Lenny temporarily eats Angie and then regurgitates her, he also regurgitates a license plate, right? The same license plate number from Jaws in 75, right? Which the tiger shark had consumed and when found by Matt Hooper and Police Chief Martin Brody.
Yeah, right.
So little Jaws reference in there. I mean, like, what an Easter egg. I mean, like, I love Jaws. I looked that one up, right? Like, it's not like I had that level of recall. It's
I've seen that. I've seen that license plate before.
And then, of course, the great white shark in Finding Nemo was called Bruce. And as we know, Bruce was the nickname given to the models used for the shark in the original Jaws in 1975, named after Spielberg's lawyer, Bruce M. Raymer.
Which was actually, they did that on, I did read that. They did that on purpose. They actually called him Bruce as their Jaws reference in Finding Nemo. So
I thought, again, this is another small amount of connective tissue, but have you got any other like fun facts, Jeff?
So obviously being a massive success, Finding Nemo spawned, and excuse my pun there, a massive demand for tropical fish, right?
Right.
Across particularly the US, but obviously around the world, that actually resulted in the population of clownfish dropped by 75% in some areas, most prominently in Vanuatu, which was apparently a massive exporter of tropical fish.
Right.
75%. But what happened, and blue tang, which was that's what Dory is. She's a blue tang.
Mm-hmm.
So, but people didn't realise, and again, the reference made when I looked it up was like, just like Darla, people didn't understand how to take care of tropical fish properly. The fact that they needed to have a minimum 30-gallon aquarium with carefully controlled salinity levels, all the stuff that actually is in the film had to actually be done to take care of these. So which is interesting because the whole premise of the film is not to keep fish as pets, yet people decided they wanted to keep fish as pets, right? But this actually saw people two ways. So it became very popular for that, and people did all these fish, but then couldn't control them, so they released them. Either flushed them down the toilet hoping that they survive like Nemo does, and of course not understanding that it's a film and fish can't go through the sewer system, or actually just pouring them into the ocean. And in actual fact, because of doing that in Florida, they actually ruined part of the ecological balance on some of Florida's reefs.
Really?
Because of the amount of tropical fish that were flushed into the area there, which is crazy.
Well, that's truly horrible.
But at the same time, pet owners who are fish owners saw this film and went, no, and then decided to get rid of their fish, and so did the same thing. So
wow,
it's pretty crazy from that perspective.
Unintended consequences, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But also the other thing I found was that basically the Australian Tourism Corporation and Queensland Tourism used, obviously with permission from Disney and Pixar, used Finding Nemo for massive marketing campaigns throughout China and Asia to actually get people to come to Australia. And so that was successful in increasing tourism into our country for tropical holidays.
Interesting.
In far north Queensland. So, yeah.
So I've got a couple of things to add to that, Jeff. Not a huge amount. So fun fact, in Latin, the word Nemo means nobody or no one. And of course, it's obviously a reference to Captain Nemo from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, right?
Yeah, of course.
And the other interesting 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea reference is in the scene where the moonfish are playing charades with Dory, the fish are whistling Whale of a Tale, which was sung by Kirk Douglas at the beginning of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea that came out in 1954.
I guess if you're going to go for classic fish films, 20,000 Leagues is a huge one.
100%. So I thought that was a nice little fun fact. A couple of others is Dory was originally male, and apparently Jim Carrey was going to voice her, right?
Wow.
But Andrew Stanton saw Ellen DeGeneres on television and realised that the sweet but scattered tone that she was obviously displaying that performance and otherwise was exactly what he was looking for in the character of Dory.
Yeah.
Now, here's a cool one I know you're going to love. Gil's scars, so Gil voiced by Willem Dafoe.
Yes.
His scars are almost identical to the ones that Tom Berenger had in Platoon in 1986. I thought that was fucking cool.
How does that?
Yeah.
Who works that out?
Oh no, it's great. It's gret. And it's funny. Like when I read it, it's like, how did I not realize that? I love Platoon.
But Defoe's in Platoon,
and Defoe's in Platoon, right? And again, to your point, what's so funny about it is that Defoe is enemies with Berenger's character in Platoon.
Yes.
Right? So I thought that was like, I think one of the best things I read in terms of Easter eggs and self-referential sort of stuff or whatever. Again, and that's like the cleverness, right? Of Nemo versus like, oh, it's in your face, like Katie Couric, get it? Get it? Right? Yeah. It's like, so anyway, so I thought that was really the fun facts that I came out of Finding Nemo. I don't have much else for Shark Tale, but I do have, I guess, one or two things, right? So the other things that I've got to add is, and I've done no research on this at all, but allegedly, and I say allegedly with capital A, the plot has some resemblance to a short story that you've never heard of, Jeff, that came out over 100 years ago. It's called The Reluctant Dragon, which is a short story from 1897, written by a gentleman by the name of Kenneth Grahame, right?
Oh, he wrote The Wind in the Willows.
Did he?
Yeah, Kenneth Grahame.
Is that where When the Willows Go?
Yeah.
Wow. How about that?
There you go.
So anyway, I thought that was interesting. The other interesting thing is there's this voice actor and YouTuber, a gentleman by the name of Christian Freites, and he mentioned that Shark Tale is a lot more like SpongeBob SquarePants than it is Finding Nemo, right? It takes place in a anthropomorphic world of fish in the ocean with an overly comedic tone, and has the main yellow male protagonist work at a place owned by a manager with aquatic puns and not so smart best friend.
There you go.
He's not wrong.
It's true. He's not.
Right? He's not wrong.
Absolutely.
So well done, Christian. Good job. So I don't have anything else. I just want to talk about some of the things that I did enjoy that we haven't sort of touched on, and maybe we can close out with this, Jeff, if you're okay with that.
Sure thing.
I love the transitions in Finding Nemo, like all the transitions from a scene to scene, whatever, they're just like amazing. And I always love it when one thing dissolves into another. So there's a shot where, the egg or, the robe, whatever you want to call it, dissolves into the moon. Like they have so many like beautiful transitions.
Yeah.
Finding Nemo, I thought they were just like amazing. I loved the setup where, Marlin and Nemo obviously clownfish, and the other fish is saying to him like, hey, tell us a joke. You're going to be funny. You're a clownfish.
Yeah.
And they like after 5 seconds ago, this guy's all funny.
Yeah.
I love that. I love like the little Easter eggs throughout, like, Buzz Lightyear is a toy on the floor in the dentist practice or clinic.
But that's always, Pixar have done that in every film they've ever done. So it's very Pixar.
So I love that stuff. I know they've got other things as well, but I just love seeing that. I also loved the Bill and Ted vibes of the turtle, where he's like, dude, Mr. Turtle is my father.
Yeah.
I'm Crush, right? I just love that. That just made me smile.
You know that the voice of Crush is actually Andrew Stanton.
Oh, that's amazing.
So, and actually, this is a point I did find, is that he recorded it as a just, what do you call it, intro track to put in temporary track. Sorry, that's what I'm looking for. As a temp track. So he recorded all the voice of Crush as a temp track. But when they started showing it to people and started getting screenings and getting feedback, it just resonated with everyone. That they got to the point, it's like, we're just going to leave it.
Oh, that's
because
awesome.
There was no one else that was like, it just works.
Well, great job by him, right?
Yeah.
So there was there's so many like amazing shots. We talked about the photo realism and otherwise, but there's one shot in particular in Finding Nemo that I think is just amazing, right? So the pelicans are flying to Sydney Harbour at night. You see the city in the background, and then the camera starts to sort of like tilt down, and you see the seagulls in the sewage. Like just so exceptionally well done. I mean, there's like paintings within paintings within paintings just in that shot. Again, just magnificent. Like truly, truly marvelous. But anything else to add before we close out, Jeff?
No, I think that's everything for now. I think we've covered these two films fairly well. I think, a good double feature mix there. But no, I think we've covered off everything.
Outstanding. So, Jeff, until next time, do you want to give a tease as to what our next episode's going to be?
Well, we've gone from family friendly to, I think we need to kill it next time in the sense of one-man armies. Two films that came out practically together in the 80s. Two absolute legendary 80s actioners. We're going to look at Rambo First Blood Part 2 and Commando. Are you ready?
I cannot wait.
All right. We'll look forward to seeing you there, my friend.
Until next time, Jeff.
Catch you, buddy.
See you, mate.
Bye.